Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 6 of Intro to Sociology. I can't believe we're just a couple weeks off from this class being over, which is, I feel like it just started. I guess it just did 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, because we're in week 6 now. I saw most everybody got in their essay from last week. There were a couple people that didn't, and I will bug you if you didn't, because it's a big part of your grade. I think it's like a eighth of your grade or something like that overall, which is pretty big for a class like this. Um, and I haven't started grading them yet, obviously, but I will start soon and have that ready for next week. This week we are covering gender, sex, and sexuality, and marriage and the family. These are a couple really big topics. So the one topic, gender, sex, and sexuality, is I feel like it's now more than ever. It is a controversial topic to talk about gender, and um, we're living in just such a strange time right now. I don't know if anybody watches the show Euphoria. There's a new season now, and there was a new episode last night. And one of the main characters is trans. Hunter Schafer is the actor's name, and in the show, their name is Jules. And we just are living in such a weird time. Like Hunter Schafer, I recall now in this Trump administration, this this ideology of like we want to make trans people vanish. We just want to like wave a magic wand and like poof, all trans people disappear. Like it's just not going to happen. I mean, it's historically, what really strikes me the most about all of this like trans fervor that's going on right now is that we're talking about like 1% of the population. We're talking about a very small number of people. And when you see all of these debates about like bathrooms and like these like who's using which bathrooms and stuff like that and sports and things like that, I feel like my opinion has always been I feel like we're missing the bigger picture here. Like sports, like sex segregation is kind of stupid in a lot of ways. I've always felt like there has to be a better way than just sex segregation to be like men play here, women play here. I feel like if we could get a lot of smart people together, we could figure out a better way to make sports fair than what is your biological sex. Like it seems arbitrary. There's a lot of women, like I'm a man, cis man, I have never questioned my gender identity. Plenty of women are much better than me at you name it, basketball, football, hockey, lacrosse, soccer. I'd venture to guess there is a woman in every sport that's better than me. And it just seems silly. I just have always thought it was like so silly that like this is what we decided to segregate sports based on is like your biological sex. It's just silly. It's silly and it's arbitrary. Um, I think in the state of Michigan, I don't know if the bans actually went through. There were like all of these bans that were proposed to like ban trans athletes or something like that. There are currently zero trans athletes in the state of Michigan. And at any given time, there's a max like three. And so it seems very reactionary and a little bit over the top to make legislation for these very particular cases. So if I'm going to put aside my argument of like come up with a better system, guys, than sex segregation, I feel like even if we just leave that alone, if we could just all agree that like let's treat all of these on a case by case basis. Like there's a small enough number of cases. Like I work in data, like primarily my research, my actual 9 to 5 job. Like I work in data, and if we have like a population of millions, and we have just a few cases that are anomalies, we'll say. It seems silly to me to put together to like make policies just around those couple outliers. Like they really ought to be dealt with on a case by case basis. I feel like, you know, should be able to figure out some very specific things for those individuals. But I do think it does point to a bigger thing about gender and about the relationship between gender and sex. Here I feel like I say this every week, like we're just living in such a politically kind of charged time. None of the stuff that I'm teaching in this class is reactionary. This is stuff I learned about when I was an undergrad 100 years ago. And here I am. And I'm sure that my instructors, my professors, learned about it when they were an undergrad 200 years ago, you know? And now here I am teaching you all, and we're teaching the same stuff. It's not reactionary. I promise you, I didn't make this class because we're living in this ridiculous time that, like, gay people are under attack. Everybody's, anybody that's like not the majority group is being persecuted and under attack. Um, I promise that's not. This is not in response to what's going on out there, but this is more in response to just the way that our society kind of composes itself. And I, if this is not the first time you've really considered and thought about the relationship between biological sex and gender, I feel like it will give you a better understanding of how to think about the arguments that are happening about this stuff, and additionally the relationship to sexuality, because gender, sex, and sexuality are three very important and very unique things for an individual. And if we were talking about, again, the concept of intersectionality, where all of these things kind of come together and form an individual, being like a white, cisgendered, meaning not transgendered, straight man is different than being like a black, trans woman who is also, straight or considers themselves straight and dates men, but they're trans. And so these things have a way of impacting each other and creating like stronger forms of discrimination. For those of you that are maybe new to the term of intersectionality, I think it's actually very interesting, the history behind it. It was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw Clark, I believe was her name. She was an attorney representing a worker at a GM factory who argued that because there were policies in place for women that were, this was like in the, I don't know, like 50s or 60s or 1950s, 1960s, something like that. There were policies in place that were providing employment for women, and there were primarily white women, and then there were policies in place for black men. So like women worked in, a lot of the white women worked in the like fine work kind of categories, like stitching and things that took a lot of like you know whatever, like attention and things like that, was, and secretary kind of work, and like that sort of stuff. White women predominantly worked in those fields. Black men worked in the really difficult parts of the factory. They were very dangerous. This was kind of the history of the labor movement in the United States. If you really look at it, that black men were almost always given the hardest, most difficult, most dangerous jobs in the factory. But then this woman comes along, and I can't remember her name, the plaintiff in this case, but she argued, and her attorney, Kimberly Crenshaw Clark, argued, I think it's Clark, as part of her last name, that as a black woman, there was no space for her. And it was because of the intersection of her identity, because she was black and a woman, that she couldn't work where white women worked, and she couldn't work where black men work. So that made her unemployable in this organization, and they couldn't find a spot for her to work. Ultimately, they lost the case because that's just kind of the way the justice system works in this country. Is they're not usually persuaded by sociological arguments. It's more just about case law and those sort of things. They did lose the case, but it provided this kind of framework that you hear about even to this day about intersectionality that I do think is very useful, because when we just think about each of these parts of us as an individual thing, I don't think it's as powerful as when you think about these things as a whole person. Like we all are the composition of all these different parts of who we are, and sometimes we may be privileged, sometimes we're discriminated against or disprivileged. Like for myself, as a straight man who is the child of immigrants and non-Western, non-white immigrants, but also is light-skinned and kind of white passing, I have like kind of a lot of, again, privileges, but also disprivileges. Like I have dealt with a lot of discrimination for being Arab my whole life, but also there's times that people just like they're like, oh, maybe he's Mexican, or maybe he's this, or maybe he's Greek, or maybe he's Italian, things like that. But it's not the same as like some of my friends who are from Yemen or something, or some of my Iraqi friends that are darker skinned, and like they have felt other like stronger discrimination than I have felt because of my ethnicity and because of my family's history and stuff like that. So it's a lot to think about. um, and to think like where do you kind of fall in this rubric of privilege, and I think some people also hear that term and they like instantly get a little bit defensive. Like you really ought to not be like everybody's privileged a little bit. Like no matter who you are, like in some spaces women have more privileges than men. In a lot of spaces men have more privileges than women. I think it's just something that you really have to accept, and you have to really critically think about, and to think about the times that you're privileged and thinks about the times that you're not privileged, or that you're disprivileged or discriminated against, or however you want to conceptualize it, because that's how we all are. We all kind of compose these different um parts of us, and it's nothing to be defensive about. I think that it's something that we all ought to embrace and to think critically about, and to think about why those things are the way they are. Like, why is whiteness privileged in this country? Like, why are things that are associated with white culture, um, just kind of everywhere you go? And, it's just like the norm in this country, and everything else is just like a special sort of thing, like, why is that, and same thing when it comes to like heterosexuality. Like, why is it that heterosexuality is like privileged um, over other types of sexuality and monogamy, and just all of the things that we just kind of like accept as like the air we breathe. It's I think there is a value in thinking critically about those things, and this is not to make any kind of argument about the merits. Like, it's not to say like one is necessarily or inherently better than the other, but I personally feel like we all should be striving for equality, and that especially now with marriage equality as being like the law of the land, so to speak, that I think that we ought to be kind of acting that way, and that we should have that be reflected in our values. And so yeah, like I said, I think these are just things to critically think about, and to think like, why do we then go, like kind of how I opened with this conversation about like the anti-trans legislation? Like, what does this serve? Like, what purpose does this serve? There's people that are starving out on the streets. My groceries are unaffordable. My, taxes keep going up. It's expensive as hell to put my kid in daycare. And then meanwhile, my legislators are over here debating like what bathroom a trans person can use. And I like when I hear this stuff, especially as a parent to young kids struggling financially, like I feel like my eyes are going to roll so far back into my head that I might die, because we have so much bigger problems to deal with in this country than what bathroom a kid who's trans may or may not use, or if Hunter Schafer's passport aligns, if the sex that's written on her passport aligns with the sex she was assigned at birth. Like, it just drives my internal rage so high, because, like I said, I mean, gas is like $4 a gallon. A pound of ground beef is still like $4 or $6 or whatever it is now. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And then this is the kind of stuff that we're out here, that our legislators are actually working on. So, um, in addition, to the gender, sex, and sexuality part of the readings. There's the chapter and the material on marriage and the family that I think you will also find interesting. This was, I feel like a lot of the early work in sociology was on marriage and the family, a lot of like functionalist perspective of looking at the family as like a little, almost like a little factory, like Talcott Parsons kind of had this idea that like the family is like the original place where like the workers are sort of established and the concept of work is established. I don't necessarily agree with it. I feel like it's a little bit like letting your logic run its course and not thinking super critically about it. But it is one way to think about it, that we all kind of are little workers in our family. It does feel that way sometimes. I definitely feel like a little worker. Like I have to assemble a gazebo this week, and I will be doing it. I'm gonna be like the little worker out here assembling this gazebo in my backyard. Um, so anyway, I'll end this here. If anybody has any questions about anything, please let me know. Hope you're finding the material interesting and that it's helping you kind of have a little more context in this crazy world that we're sort of living in. So I hope you all have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. See you later. Bye.